wasn't so bad because Adam returns his phone calls. And I said to him, well, maybe if we all wrote Adam a bigger check, he'd return our phone calls too. Folks, that's the mindset. That is what we have right now. People more concerned with being behind closed doors than knocking on doors. The two independent bodies that have reviewed all the candidates have endorsed my candidacy. The largest newspaper in the state of Illinois and Illinois' oldest independent progressive organization. Not because our positions are that much different, but because they know I am the best chance to beat Adam Kinzinger this November. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Next up for the 3-minute introduction, Sarah Dady.
Good evening, Belvedere. Thank you to the Boone County Democrats and to Mike for moderating. And thank you to my husband. Without his support, I certainly could not be running this campaign. My name is Sarah Dady, and I'd very much like to be your Congresswoman in the 16th. I'm from Rockford. I grew up in Rockford, and I still live in Rockford. I am an immigration attorney. Alan and I have 2 kids that go to the same public schools I attended. I started my immigration law practice out of the living room of my house. And a decade later, I've got the largest immigration law firm west of Chicagoland in downtown Rockford with 12 employees. I love my hometown. I love the 16th Congressional District. I grew up in it, and I still live in it after the redistrict. As an attorney who's represented over 4,000 individuals and families in their personal quest for the American dream, which very simply is to be able to live in peace, have a good paying job to support themselves and their family. That's what the American dream is. To me, there's no way I could represent my clients' best interests if I have not spoken to them and had them tell me what they want. We don't have that kind of representation now, but we deserve that representation. The 16th District is the head and heart of Illinois. We are decent people who work hard, and we deserve to have a representative that has our backs in Washington, D.C. I hope to bring to this race accountability, to be an active representative working in our people's best interests, and to be accessible. That's the key with democracy. I hope after tonight and in the next 3 weeks, I will earn your vote on March 20th so we can get real representation in the 16th. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Our final introduction, Neil Mohammed.
Well, good evening, Belvedere. My name is Neil Mohammed. I'm from DeKalb, Illinois, and the first ballot I ever cast in a presidential election was for Al Gore, so it actually does get a little bit more challenging in the caucus.
I dated myself.
There were some sleepless nights in November of 2000. I'm running for Congress, and I'm asking to be your representative in Washington because I know how lucky I've been. My dad, Mati, he's an immigrant himself. He came to this country from a place that I'm sure very few folks here tonight are familiar with, called Pakistan. And he did live the American dream. He came here seeking economic opportunity. He put himself through college. He became an American citizen. My mom also, her name's Ann, she also comes from a place that very few people in this room have been to. It's called South Dakota. She was one of 8 brothers and sisters, and when she was a kid, she worked at the family business, which was the A&W Drive-In. So I didn't start in the middle class. My mom's a secretary, and my dad worked at Kmart. So the reason I'm here tonight, and the reason that I've had any opportunity in my own life, is not so much to do with me, but it's a lot to do with the work that earlier generations of Democrats and progressive Democrats put into building the kind of country where even if you weren't born into the middle class, even if you weren't born into privilege, you could accomplish some great things anyway. Democrats built a ladder for people like me and a lot of people like you all in this room. Some of those rungs are small. There's the hot lunch program out in school. There's the daycare center at my grade school that was so important because both of my folks worked outside the home. There's the fact that I was only able to pay for college because of government subsidized loans. And of course, there's some big rungs on that ladder too. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That democratic legacy is not just a policy platform. That is a moral statement. That is a vision of the way that our country should work and the way that we want it to work. That's our vision. The Republican vision, of course, is very different. Where Democrats built a ladder to bring people up, Republicans spend every waking moment trying to kick that ladder back down. And you don't need me to give you any number of examples from the last year or so of why that's the case. So our task then is not just to be voters in this election. It's to be leaders and ambassadors for that kind of moral vision, that moral clarity, that kind of world in which we want to live. That's why I'm so excited to be your representative, to articulate and to lead on that vision in Washington. My name is Neil Mohammed. I'm from DeKalb, Illinois, and I very much want to earn your vote by the end of the night for the primary March 20th. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, and thanks again to all the candidates for the introduction, all keeping time so far. We will ask questions, and we will be sticklers on the time. We have 3 minutes for each original question. We are being timed. If you reach that time limit, I will say finish your thought, and then we will move on. So the first question will go to Mrs. Briel, and the question for all the candidates, what is your single biggest strength? What is your single biggest weakness?
And time starts when we start talking, right?
Right.
That's an excellent question and something I haven't thought about since I interviewed for a job back in the old days. My single biggest strength is understanding. Understanding that we all have a different perspective, that we all come from a different place, but that we all are the same. We're all people. We all love. We all fear. We all want to pursue happiness, the pursuit of happiness. So because we have different opinions and different stands doesn't make us good or bad people. It just makes us different. And as long as we break down those barriers and walls and focus on what our similarities are, that's how we're going to move forward as a nation. My biggest weakness can be impatience. It is very hard to sit and watch everything that is going on in our country today. It's painful to see children worried about not being able to have their parents come home because of immigration issues. It's hard to see children being shot up in schools because we won't do anything about automatic weapons. So impatience is possibly my biggest weakness. Thank you.
Thank you. It does sound like a job interview question, but this is a job interview, so we will ask the same question now to Ms. Nady. What is your single biggest strength and single biggest weakness?
I'm of the opinion that our greatest strength is also our greatest weakness. My greatest strength is my tenacity. And in fact, my husband, Alan, wrote that into his wedding vows as one of the 3 qualities that he loved best about me. After nearly 18 years of marriage, I'm not sure he's going to say that's the thing he loves best about me. But being tenacious, it's important, particularly with my job. I love what I do. I love representing the little person when the entire resources of our amazing United States government are marshaled against this little person saying, what right or why should we allow you to live in the United States? It's very intimidating for an individual. And to be their advocate, to stand beside them in court and not give up. It's one of the things I love about the law. You can lose one battle, but then there's an appeal. There's another opportunity to win. And if you lose that, there's another appeal. I have had cases that have taken me 10 years to win. Battles that I have waged on behalf of clients. And that's what I love. Now, it's also my greatest weakness because sometimes I don't give up when I should. but I'm willing to accept that as a weakness because I think it's far more important to fight for those who can't fight for themselves, to get that message across that this is the right thing for our country. And on that, I will never give up.
Thank you, Sarah. Mr. Mohammed, same question to you. Your biggest strength and your single biggest weakness.
I think my greatest strength is the ability to lead, not only on the issues, but in practice. And that's why I don't want to go to Washington just to vote the right way. I want to go to Washington to write the bills that help get some of this stuff done. I've spent 7 years of my career working with small rural hospitals all across this country, hospitals just like the ones throughout our district. And what I do with them is pretty simple. I help them stand up and stop getting screwed by big pharma and the insurance industry. And so that's why I bring so much passion to these issues, because I've lived these things. I've seen doctors and patients who can't pay for their meds for no other reason other than some insurance executive or some pharma executive is lining their pockets and trying to buy a second vote. So I have a lot of expertise in these issues. I have the capacity to lead on these issues, and that's why I'm here. My greatest weakness, I think, is that I'm not always as polite as I could be. Murray stole my answer, so I'm dressing this up a little bit, but I decided to run in this race not because I was recruited, not because the Democratic Party had a particular interest in this district. We all know that it doesn't, at least not for the time being. I wanted to run for office, and I wanted to represent the place that I grew up, because people are hurting. And we don't have time to be polite about that. We don't have time to compromise on some of the greatest issues and challenges that are facing our district. We don't have time to muddle through shoving more money at the insurance companies so we can get the number of uninsured down from 25 million to 20 million. We don't have time to give families a tax credit to pay for college when more than 50% of American families don't have $500 in the bank. We don't have time to keep punting the can down the road when it comes to income inequality. I take that stuff seriously. I sometimes get ahead of myself. I hate slowing down these issues because we know the human cost of not doing the work and not pushing as far and as quickly and as assertively as we can.
Thank you, Neil. Mrs. Bercolio Osmond, your turn for your biggest strength and weakness.
I would say that my biggest strength is my ability to problem solve. As a farmer, as a mom with 3 boys, I know that problems are always going to happen. Life doesn't usually go the way we plan it. Whether that's a soccer game that was canceled because of the rain, whether that's the livestock that decided that the fence isn't going to apply to them today, we've all had problems. And the motto at our farm and at our house is that there is always a solution. Now, I can tell you that we don't always come up with the best solution right off the bat. And we certainly don't always solve the problem perfectly the first time. But having a solutions mindset and having faith that we can and will find a solution that at the very least is a place to start has gotten us through a lot of problems in the past couple of decades that we've been doing this. Now, my greatest weakness, I think, is my ability to see all sides of an issue. I too can be impatient, and I too want to forge ahead, but I also know that I'm not the only one out there with an opinion. And I know that when we talk about, well, it's just common sense, you know, people on the other side of any given issue think that their opinion is common sense too. And I realize that we need to move forward and we need to come to decisions. But I do think, as Sarah said, that we can turn our weakness into our strength, because I think the ability to hear all sides of an issue and the ability to put myself in others' shoes is a weakness in some areas, but at the same time, one that I'm willing to own and one that I think can be turned to a strength.
Thank you, Beth. Can I call you all by your first name?
Yes,
okay,
please.
we can do that. Okay, very good. And we all met our time limit, so I'm going to try a follow-up question real quick. This one's only 2 minutes. And what is the biggest weakness of the current 16th Congressional District Congressman, Adam Kinzinger, and how can you turn that into a strength? And we're going to start in the same order. The next question will rotate, but the same order for the follow-up question. So, Murray, you start.
Could I ask you to clarify the last part of that question?
What is the biggest weakness, and how can you turn that weakness into a strength if you took over?
How could I? Okay, I thought you said how could he. I was
No.
like, oh, that's a tough one. The biggest weakness that our current representative has is his inaccessibility and his lack of listening to his constituents. I can't tell you how many times I have heard over and over, I call him, I email him, I write him. We've even started to see him blocking people on social media, which they're deciding whether or not that's a constitutional violation or not. He doesn't hold town halls. If we remember back to when he got this district, he accused Debbie Halverson of never holding town halls. That's how he got in. When's the last town hall he's had? Anybody know, except for the Civility Summit? Exactly, we can't even name when the last time he had a town hall. He doesn't mind going and visiting certain establishments that are Republican owned and endorsed, but he won't come and talk to you. I have yet to see him campaigning in the district, knocking on doors, talking to constituents. No, it's all about backroom deals. So what would I do differently? I will hold regular town halls. I will make sure I am accessible. And if I am not, my staff will get back to you quickly and with an actual answer. I will also give anyone in this room at any time my personal cell phone number. That doesn't go to a team or to an administrator. It goes directly to me, and I'm more than happy to give that out.
Thank you. Sarah, same question.
Our current representative has failed to build relationships in his district. He's failed to build relationships with even locally elected Republicans, independents, and Democrats. In 1992, I received a phone call at 9 a.m. in the morning when I was home over summer break from college. And on the other end of the line was then candidate Don Manzullo. And he said, I ran into your mom at the county fair and she said, you don't like me, why not?
Oh.
And I told him I didn't like his position on health care. We proceeded to argue for 20 minutes. We agreed we were not going to agree and left it at that. I never voted for Don Manzullo, but I always respected him because he walked into disagreement. And that's important. When Adam Kinzinger won this seat, there were a lot of bad feelings from elected Republicans. And Adam Kinzinger has never bothered to heal those rifts. I have spent my whole life volunteering for the University of Illinois, a cooperative extension service with 4-H. I volunteer my time with Republican and Democratic county board members in Winnebago County. I'm the president of the board of Neighborhood Network, which supports neighborhood organizations in Winnebago County and Belvedere with community gardens. And I work a lot with locally elected representatives. And that's important. We have to have a U.S. rep that has our backs in D.C., knows what local concerns are, and is willing to work cooperatively. And that's Adam Kinzinger's greatest weakness, and that's why he will lose in November.
Thank you, Sarah. Neil, same question. Adam Kinzinger's biggest weakness and how you would make that a strength.
Adam Kinzinger's biggest weakness is that he's a coward. Adam Kinzinger's biggest weakness is that he can't stand for anything. He doesn't have the moral imagination to tell right from wrong. To the extent that Adam Kinzinger takes a stand on anything, it's for civility. We should all be nicer to each other. The problem with our politics right now is not that people are impolite, it's not that people aren't nice, it's not even that people call each other nasty things on social media. It's that we have a government led by someone who targets minorities, and we have a party in power that targets the poor. That's the problem with our politics, and that's what we need to change. Adam Kinzinger going on TV and wringing his hands about the latest, whether it's the travel ban, whether it's anything else on the president's Twitter account. Oh gosh, well, see, that's too bad. I wish he hadn't said that. That's not the issue. The Twitter is not the issue. The issue is being able to distinguish between right and wrong. And if Adam Kinzinger is not willing, or God forbid, able to do that, then he doesn't need to be in Washington. And that's exactly what I pride myself on. I don't pull punches. I don't shy away from issues. If you ask me a question, I'm going to tell you exactly not just how I feel about that issue, but why. Why did I come to that position? That's the 180-degree polar opposite of Adam Kinzinger, and that's exactly what I'm going to do in Washington.
Thank you, Neil. Beth, same question.
Well, first of all of the above. But another weakness that I think Adam Kinzinger has is his inability to relate to the people in our district. Let me tell you a little bit about Adam's history. Coming out of college, he got elected to his county board. He then went into the military, which we all respect, and then he got elected to Congress. He's worked for the government all of his life. And a lot of people do, and that's not a bad thing. But in order to connect and in order to represent the people of our district, our congressperson needs to understand the day-to-day lives in our district. He or she needs to understand what it's like to try and feed their family and make ends meet. What it's like to work at a job every day because you know that that's what your family needs from you. And what it's like to lose that job and have to depend on the social safety net and the generosity of your community. And those are the things that Adam doesn't understand. And I believe that if you don't understand the needs of people and the experiences of people, that you're not going to do a very good job listening to them because you don't have the empathy of having walked in their shoes. The difference is I have. I've had a broad range of experiences, and I've worked with a lot of people, and I have that empathy and I have that ability to communicate.
Thank you, Beth. We're now back to a primary question, which allows for a 3-minute response. This time, we will start with Sarah. How can you, as a candidate, reach out to those who feel disillusioned by current politics?
The only way we are going to win this district is the only way we ever win elections. It's person to person. It's ground up. That means going out, talking to as many people as possible, listening to them, and making the case for why we deserve to have a representative that's going to work to improve everyone's lives a little bit. Why we all, every single resident of this district, should have the opportunity to succeed. So it's really person to person. And that's why my campaign, I've invested in people. I've invested in a field operation where we are knocking those doors. We are making those calls. I made a commitment when I started running to try and meet as many people as possible. I have been to 13 out of the 14 counties that make up this amazing district multiple times. I've earned the endorsement of over 30 locally elected Democrats throughout this district because they know my work. And I sat down and I talked with them and I listened and I said, what can we do on the federal level to help strengthen your community? And that's what it's going to take. I'm also pleased that I've had the opportunity to travel this district because I've never done that before. I had no idea where Morris, Illinois was until I started running. And I'm pleased to say we have someone from Grundy County who came up today to Belvedere, his first time coming to Belvedere. He is a Gardner Township Commissioner. And so I'm using my campaign to introduce everyone in the district to each other. We should be really proud of who we are and we need a representative who is just as proud. So I will run my representation exactly the same way that I'm running my campaign. Being out multiple times a month in every corner of this district, bringing everybody in so everyone feels like they have a voice and they're at the decision-making table. And that's how we engage people. That's how I've run my law practice and earned the trust of my clients, and that's how I will earn the trust of the people of this district.
Thank you, Sarah. Same question, Neil. How do you reach out to those who feel disillusioned by current politics?
The fact of the matter is, as we all know, there are a lot of people who are disillusioned with politics of both parties. We know that, and thankfully a lot of us decided enough was enough, and we rebelled against that feeling by running for office and showing up and going to meetings. Before I was helping doctors and patients stand up in the pharmaceutical industry, I was in an entirely different line of work, which was earning a PhD in teaching political science at the University of Michigan. And the only reason I mention that is because when I was thinking about getting into this race nearly a year ago, I say a little disbelievingly, I looked at the data because it was important to me not to commit 2 years of my life potentially to doing this if the race couldn't be won. So I looked at the data, I went back a ways. The most important factoid potentially about this race in this district is this. You take the district as it looks now, the big L going around the suburbs, look at all those precincts, you look at how those precincts voted. This district voted for President Obama in 2008 by 3 points. So when we talk about disillusioned voters, we have to be really specific about who we're talking about. We're talking about Democrats who voted in 2008 and didn't vote in 2016. And we have to ask ourselves why. And I think that answer is challenging to admit out loud, but it's not very complicated. The reason those voters didn't show up is because Democrats haven't been here nationally. Because the Democratic Party in DC hasn't bothered to recruit candidates, they haven't helped people organize, they didn't even get anyone on the ballot last year against Adam Kinzinger. And as a Democratic voter, why would you come out? When the former head of the National Party, a guy named Ed Rendell, who also used to be the governor of Pennsylvania, when he says that we don't need to run candidates in rural districts because we'll make it up in the cities and the suburbs, leader of our party, what message does that send? So we do have to reach out to disillusioned voters, and specifically we have to reach out to disillusioned Democrats. That's why I started running. That's why we're raising the money. That's why we're building the operation. And it's because we've been able to do that on my campaign that I'm the only campaign to have been endorsed by a sitting member of Congress, that being Representative Bill Foster.
Thank you, Neil. Beth?
The voters in our district, like the voters throughout the country, are tired of the chaos. And so many people voted in ways that they thought, at the last election, voted in ways that they thought would help them. Now, whether they were right or wrong, whether they were frustrated with the Democratic Party, and rightfully so in many cases, or whether they just wanted something new, something shiny, they're frustrated. And they're frustrated now because they are tired of the chaos, and they are tired of the looting that Congress is doing while we all pay attention to whatever crazy thing is coming over the current news cycle. And those are the voters that we can connect with in this district. Those are the voters who care about the kitchen table issues, their jobs, their communities, their infrastructure. Are we going to get a new road? Are we going to get those potholes fixed? Are we going to have safe waterways that don't have another century flood? I've had 3 in this decade in my local area. The way we're going to connect with those voters is sitting down and talking to them getting out to the coffee shops and the school gymnasiums and the dining room tables. And that's what I've been doing in my campaign. That's what I will do as a representative, because these are the people I know. These are my friends and neighbors. And I know that we have the same concerns, we have the same hopes, and we can work together to make real changes happen.
Thank you, Beth. Murray, see a question?
There are a lot of disillusioned voters, but they're not just Democrats. They're independents and Republicans too. But I'd like to make a point of distinction here. The disillusioned voters, the disillusioned people, are the teachers, the dentists, the plumbers, the accountants. They're the everyday folks who come to and from work, take care of their kids, get them off to school. Those that are leaders, local leaders, community activists, those people aren't disillusioned. Those people are engaged. Whether they're happy about what's going on or not, they've taken that step to get involved in the process. How do we reach those disillusioned voters? By being with them. You can knock and have a team knock as many doors as you want, but we all see what happens when Adam's team answers the phone and talks to us, or writes an email to us, or sends us a form letter. That's not the same as being door to door. My campaign is grassroots. My campaign is about making sure that people understand their voice counts, that they are important. The teachers, the laborers, the accountants, not the elected officials. That is how we are going to get the disillusion to disappear, by being real, by being accessible, and by doing that to common people, like myself.
Thank you all. We will move on to the next question, and thanks again for keeping it within the time limit so far. 3 minutes for this question as well. And we'll start with Neil. What do you consider a wasted opportunity in America today, and how would you propose we realize that potential?
Think about that one for a second. I think that I could name 2 or 3. Let me start with one. We had an opportunity in 2008 to finally build an economy that worked for everybody. We had an opportunity in 2008 to say enough was enough with Wall Street speculation, with hedge funders and investment bankers playing roulette with our retirement savings, our pensions, and our 401ks. What happened in 2008, one of the single greatest redistributions of wealth in certainly our country's history, if not the world's, happened to go from the bottom up. Teachers, ordinary working families, the folks that Murray was just describing, they all took a bath, and in turn we bailed out the biggest banks. The people whose greed and unceasing appetite for risk created the disaster in the first place. And we could have done something about that. We could have broken up the banks. We could have held people accountable. We could have put the people who were committing widespread fraud, whether it was lying to the regulators, whether it was lying to one another about what was in all those investments, we could have held them accountable. We could have put some of them in jail because they were guilty. But we didn't. Instead, we papered things over, we let them skate, and we asked everybody in this room to hold the bag. 8 years later, no one really talks about that issue anymore, but I'm convinced, and I will go to my grave believing, that we would not have President Trump in 2016 if we had taken working people seriously in 2008. That's a massive failure on the part of our political establishment. Unfortunately, that's a bipartisan failure, shared in by both Democrats and Republicans, and I think, unfortunately, it's one that we're still paying for.
Thank you, Neil. Same question to Beth. What do you consider a wasted opportunity in America today, and how would you propose we realize that potential?
I think one of our greatest wasted opportunities was how, as a country, we failed to capitalize and capture and build on the hope of the Obama administration, especially the first term. A new dawn in America. We all felt that. We all felt that things are going pretty well, right? The arc of history is bending in the right direction. And we got complacent. We all decided that the professionals have got this, right? We've got good people in charge. And in many cases we did. But by disengaging at that point and saying, oh, they got it, it's all good. We can go about our lives. And we can take care of our families, and we can focus on our day-to-day. And I did it too, certainly. But we didn't stay active, and we didn't stay mobilized, and we didn't continue to support and push for that change and that hope, and we let it slide away. We let the ugliness of racism, and we let the class warfare of that redistribution of wealth that kept just going up, we let that slide because we didn't stay active. Now, we're on the course to correct that, because last year's Women's March, all those pink hats, this year's Women's March, the kids down in Florida and across the country, people are engaged again. So, we made a mistake, folks, but we're here to fix it, because people like us are stepping up. People who have never been in politics before, people who have never marched before, are marching, and people are running, and we are going to correct that mistake.
Thank you, Beth. We're talking about how you would consider, what would you consider a wasted opportunity in America today, and how would you propose we realize that potential? And now it's Murray's turn.
I think one of the greatest wasted opportunities is the opportunity to make our education system better. We could have done a number of things, but we chose to let things like No Child Left Behind sit for too long. And that did none of us any good. There's a myth out there that you have to go to college in order to have a good life. That began about 30 years ago, maybe, because we wanted kids to better themselves. But what happened during that was we pushed kids away from the vocational trainings. We pushed kids away from childcare, labor, auto, electronics, so they could go to college. Not every kid wants to go to college or belongs in college right away. What we need to do is build that vocational base up again. There are jobs right now in Rockford that can't be filled. Specialty Screw has CNC presses and die cutters. They don't have people to do those jobs because no one's trained in those jobs. We need to build partnerships in order to make that happen. But we also need to start focusing on the kids, on our future, on education from the ground up. And what if someone does want to go to college? Then they should be able to for a reasonable amount of money. The first thing is allowing students with student loan debt to refinance at current interest rates. The next step is to create a federal program, a program that involves working with the communities to decide what's the greatest needs, those industries that need the most people. A few years ago, 10, 15 years ago, it was teachers, and about 5 years ago, it was nurses. If there is a need in the community, we should be able to have people who want to go into that field, get their degrees, go work, whether it's urban or rural, and then have their loan debt forgiven as a service. So our education is where we've missed. Our kids deserve a world-class education, and we don't do that. Focus on the ground up, rebuild programs like the vocational arts, and make college more affordable.
Thank you, Murray. Sarah?
Every day we deport a mother, a father, a neighbor, a coworker, an employee because of our dysfunctional immigration system. That is a wasted opportunity for justice in this country. We can't confuse the law with justice. They're not the same thing. We have a system of immigration laws that are second only to our tax code in their complexity. We set many people up to fail. 11 million undocumented people in this country did not have a right way to come in the first place when our economy demanded that they come. We passed NAFTA, which killed Mexican agriculture, which pushed Mexican workers out of Mexico. Our economy was booming in the 90s, which pulled them in, but yet we did not provide a lawful way for them to come. But they came, we let them work, we let them fall in love, get married, have kids, buy a house, open bank accounts, and now this administration is enforcing the law to deport each and every one of them. 2013 was a missed opportunity for our Congress to pass comprehensive immigration reform. The Senate had passed it. It was in the House. There were enough votes in the House to pass comprehensive immigration reform, but the 40 members of the Freedom Caucus refused to let Speaker Boehner bring it to the floor for a vote. And to this day, Speaker Boehner says that's one of the greatest regrets of his career, was not bringing immigration reform to the floor for a vote. Immigration reform not only is the moral thing to do, because we want to keep families together. Families are important. People who contribute to our communities are important, but it's the best thing we could do economically. We depend very heavily on immigrants to complement the U.S. workforce, from highly skilled to very low skilled. Study after study shows the United States would gain a net economic benefit if we allowed 11 million people in this country to apply for lawful status. Here in the state of Illinois, we have 500,000 undocumented people living here in the state of Illinois. 32,000 of them have DACA. Their work permits are going to start expiring next week. Every day that goes by that we don't work for justice for our friends and our neighbors and our coworkers, that's a missed opportunity.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to skip the next question on our list for those involved because I think it would garner the similar answers that we've already heard. So now, Beth, here's the next question for all of you. The country's current debt is approximately $18 trillion. Our debt is expected to increase by an additional $1.5 trillion as a result of the new tax plan. How do you propose we control spending and begin paying off some of this debt?
First, the tax plan is a travesty. And the most insidious thing about it is that it looks kind of good right now. A lot of people are going to get some returns this year and maybe next year. And when you're living from week to week and paycheck to paycheck, it's really hard to think about 5 years from now this is going to be bad. I get that. But what it is really long-term good for that incredibly wealthy corporations, 1%. So one of the first priorities in the next Congress is going to be to fix that. Also, and debt is important, without a doubt, and it's a very scary term, but we also need to remember that we need to look at the economy as a whole, and that we need to consider the debt to GDP ratio, and that we need to make responsible choices and spend money where it makes sense that's going to grow our economy. We need to invest in infrastructure in the way that the government has traditionally invested in infrastructure. 80% from the federal government, 20% from the local municipalities, not the other way around, as is currently on the table. We need to be willing to make cuts where it's only benefiting the very few, the very wealthy, and the very influential. And to do that, we need an independent Congress. We need people like us going to Congress who aren't backed by PACs, who aren't backed by powerful corporations, and who will be willing to stand up and make those hard decisions that will allow our economy to grow in a responsible way that benefits the largest majority of the country, of our communities, not only the already very rich.
Thank you, Beth. So Murray, the question to you, how do we pay off this $18 trillion debt, or at least start paying that off?
So the first thing we have to do is we have to repeal this absolutely horrible tax scam that was just passed. Not only does it disenfranchise and harm most of the population, it's a benefit to the 1%, the donors, and corporations. We need to close corporate loopholes that allow for companies to put their money offshore. We need to make sure that hedge fund managers pay, not just on the interest. We need to consider strongly adopting a progressive income tax so that those pay what they should pay based on their incomes. We need to look at our military spending. There are some areas within the military that are well documented, absolutely known about, that we need to take into consideration. The fighter jet that we've been working on for the last 20 years that has cost us billions and billions of dollars needs to end. That doesn't mean not fund our military. My dad is a veteran of the Korean War. He jumped out of perfectly good planes. He's at the veterans home. But we need to make sure we fund our military, but let's do it sensibly. Not waste the funds that could be used in so many other ways, including paying off the debt.
Thank you, Murray. Sarah?
1.8 trillion, that's a big number,
Yeah.
right? Well, as we all know, your debt to income ratio is important, right? So if you're $1 million in debt, that's a lot of debt if you're only bringing in $50,000 a year in income. But if you're bringing in $900,000 a year in income, it's not such a big deal. What we forget when we talk about the debt is economic productivity. The amount of debt is relevant only if we look at how we're going to be able to pay it in the future, and that means increasing economic productivity. In my business, if I looked at our expenses and said to my law partner, Beth, our expenses are way too high. I think what we need to do is stop taking new cases and getting new clients. That would sound insane, right? That's exactly what the Republicans did with this tax bill. They said, look, we're going to run a giant deficit. Let's hand out tax cuts. Let's cut our revenues to the federal government. It is fiscally irresponsible. What we need to do is not talk about tax cuts. We have to talk about preserving and increasing tax revenues, which is not about raising taxes. It's about raising incomes. If we want more tax revenues, then the middle class needs to be paid a fair wage, a livable wage that increases year to year. That's what we have to do. And that's going to require comprehensive immigration reform. That would be a kickstart to our economic productivity, let people actually have legal status. We need to increase the minimum wage to $15, and we need to ban right to work as a national piece of legislation. So we make sure that we keep and increase these good union jobs that have been the way into the middle class for Americans for decades, but are being undermined by this Republican agenda.
Thank you, Sarah. Neil, we're talking about working off this $18 trillion debt.
And respectfully, Mike, I think it's the wrong question to be asking. We don't have a spending problem, we have a revenue problem. And Republicans, and frankly a lot of centrist obsessions with the national debt, it has real consequences. Back in 2010, there were a couple of economists, and you can look this up. You're going to think I'm making it up because it sounds so silly, but it's true. These two economists found claim to have found the magic bullet. They found that if debt over GDP, the debt to GDP ratio, which you heard both Sarah and Beth mention a second ago, they found if that exceeded 90%, that all heck break loose. Economy craters, people out of work. And so everyone listened to them and started slashing services, food stamps, Medicaid, this is the origin of some of the Medicaid, right to work, welfare reform, all the rest. Did it here, did it in the United Kingdom, did it across Western Europe. Here's the problem. They were wrong. They were doing this in Microsoft Excel, and they highlighted the wrong cells. Silly, stupid math error. Turns out it doesn't matter. That 90% ratio, it's made up, it's not real, it has nothing to do with how the economy actually performs. But our obsession with the national debt led to hysteria, led to cutting vital social services, and frankly, it got people killed. That's the reality of our obsession with the national debt. Now, to the extent that we need to address the debt, we need to follow the dollars. When I go into a struggling, financially distressed hospital that's looking at bankruptcy, do a pretty simple thing. You start where the money is. And the money is not in the social safety net. The money's in the military. And the money's in the tax breaks for the billionaires. And any discussion about our fiscal position as a country that doesn't include those two things first and foremost, we're kidding ourselves. One independent outlet estimates that there are about $16 billion worth of white elephant projects in Afghanistan right now. Schools that were never used, hospitals that were built and then blown up by the Taliban or God knows who else, roads that aren't maintained, $16 billion. There's some estimates that you could solve homelessness in this country for $10 billion. Stroke of a pen. In the most literal possible sense, give every person, every American, a home. Almost half that amount. So we have to be willing to follow the money, we have to be willing to question that orthodoxy, and we have to make sure that we're looking at the people who caused the problem, not the people who are being victimized by the problem.
Thank you, Neil. We will start this question with Murray, and the question is, what are your ideas to better manage healthcare and prescription drug costs?
Universal health care is an amazing goal, and I support that 100%. The expansion of Medicaid should happen. Unfortunately, when we come into next January, regardless of which one of us comes through, no one is going to be able to write and pass a bill that allows for universal health care. Not because they're not smart enough or good enough, but because we will not have veto-proof majorities in the House and the Senate, and there will still be a Republican, whether it's our current president or not, in the White House. We have to look at this from a logical perspective. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that any of the protections put in place by the ACA remain. We can't have people losing their coverage because of pre-existing conditions. I remember back when I was expecting my first son, I was working for a company that was less than understanding about my pregnancy and less than supportive and pretty hostile. I wanted to change jobs, but I couldn't because I was on my own insurance, not on my husband's, and because pregnancy was considered a pre-existing condition. No one should be denied coverage because of a pre-existing condition. We have 3 boys with asthma and ADHD. They wouldn't be covered. So that's one thing that we need to make sure happens. Do we want to move forward? Absolutely. Do we want to get to a unified healthcare? You bet we do. We have to take a logical, realistic approach to it. Prescription drug costs are ridiculous. There are several options on the table, including allowing us to import drugs from other countries. Unfortunately, the corporations and the lobbyists of the pharmaceutical companies do not want that to happen, so we don't have that option on the table. I would recommend, first, limiting the amount of commercials that pharmaceutical companies can run. Because how many times have you been watching TV and had an itch and they tell you that you've got some sort of contagious disease and you need to go get it fixed and ask for this medicine? The second step we need to do is be able to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies to get those drug costs down, and that will happen as we move toward a universal health care.
Thank you, Murray. Sarah, we're still on the topic of managing healthcare and better handling drug costs.
I believe access to healthcare is a right. And I believe that even before I lost my mother, who died because she didn't have access to medical care because she was uninsured. I continue to believe that. As an employer, my law partner Beth and I made a commitment to our employees that we would pay 50% of their health insurance premiums every year. And then as health insurance premiums go up anywhere from 17 to 20% every year, we realized that the raises that we were giving them were going to be eaten up in their increased premiums that they were responsible for paying. So my law partner and I increased the portion of the premium that we pay every year. Now we pay nearly 75% of our employees' health care premiums. And it's a lot of money. And it's unsustainable for any small employer. And it's not fair to our employees. What if we want to give them bigger raises? What if we wanted to hire 1.5 new positions into our firm, creating more jobs for our community? And we can't, because we're held hostage by this private insurance system that we are accepting in this country. We're the only first world nation that doesn't have universal health insurance, and it's hurting us economically as well. I believe that we need to start expanding the government programs for healthcare that do work, like Medicare. Medicare is a great program. It works for a lot of people, but we need to start lowering the age so more people can start getting Medicare. Medicaid works. It worked for me when I was pregnant and didn't have health insurance with both of my children. And it's an important safety net. And we need to increase the income requirements so more working families can qualify for it. Also, we have to keep in mind, we don't have enough medical providers in this country. In this district, there is a woman who was 30 weeks pregnant, had Medicaid, and could not get in to see a doctor until she was 30 weeks pregnant. So insurance is just half of the problem. The other half is making sure that we have enough medical providers, and we're putting the competition where it should be. Not between insurance companies fighting over employers to insure, but between doctors and hospitals in providing patient care at the highest levels. The last thing is absolutely, our government, should be able to negotiate drug prices under Medicare and Medicaid. It's obscene that we gave up that right. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Now for your thoughts on managing healthcare, Neil?
I'm tempted to just say Medicare for all and pass the mic, but I'll use more time than that. So we know our healthcare system is too expensive, and I'll get into why that is and what the answer is, why the answer is Medicare for all in a second. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact either that our broken healthcare system isn't just a financial issue. It really is a social justice issue. 2 kids in this country will get wildly different healthcare, quality of care provided to them depending on where their parents work. That's the reality of our system that says you get insurance from your boss and not from somewhere else. 2 kids, completely same talent, whatever, will lead dramatically different lives depending on the accident of their birth. We're the only country that lets your boss decide what doctor you go to. And that's not just a problem in general, because that's not something that should be their responsibility. That's a women's rights issue. Because a woman who had the bad fortune of applying for a job at Hobby Lobby is going to have a very different standard of care given to her than somebody who doesn't. And until we break the private insurance industry, that's going to keep happening. And the important thing to realize here, that all the particulars that Murray and Sarah and Beth were just describing, that's all the insurance industry. That all comes down to the way we do insurance in this country. If you're diabetic, I'm sure some folks in this room are, you may have seen the price of insulin go up 300% in the last year. That's not because there's less insulin to go around. That's because the manufacturers, pharma, when they rebate their way into the insurance companies known as pharmacy benefit managers. It's a shadow insurance system. It's all just insurance. If your manufacturer didn't pay up, your particular insulin, the insulin your doctor and you have decided that works best for you, then your insurer was able to jack up the cost. And what do we get for all that? We get a system of private health insurance in this country that abuses and humiliates people. One of our largest private insurers in this country was just caught throwing people's medical claims away. Aetna routinely, you go to the doctor, your doctor fills out paper goes to the insurer, says you got to pay this much. Aetna was tossing that in the trash and leaving patients with the bill. Two of our other large insurers back in 2009 were caught operating entire departments whose only function was to find the most expensive people with organ transplants, people receiving chemotherapy for cancer treatments, and cut off their insurance. That's the system as it is now with the Affordable Care Act. That is the reality of how the system is designed to work, and that is why we can't wait on this anymore. That's why our demand has to be Medicare for all.
Thank you, Neil. Beth?
You know, I pride myself on being reasonable. And I do believe that the ACA was a good first solution. And I think our first realistic step is to at least get back to that. Because if you remember how much people hated the ACA when it was a theory, but once it got put in place, people went, oh, well, I don't like Obamacare, but this ACA thing is pretty good, right? It's helping me, it's helping my family. So we need to at least get back to where we were, that the Republicans repeal and do nothing, really is what they meant. The parts that were working that they've stripped away. So that is the correct first step. But I just read a Facebook post the other day about a woman that I went to high school with who has cancer, has been fighting breast cancer for about 3 years now, and was working for a local government agency, actually, and lost her job. Just as she started, she'd gone through all of the chemotherapy, and as she was about halfway through the course of radiation treatment, lost her job. And you know what? When you lose your job, she lost her insurance. So this woman who has worked her whole life now is having fundraisers to pay her bills. And I can put myself in her shoes, and I know we are all going to rally around her. We're going to have these fundraisers, and we're going to help her out. But imagine how it must feel to have to go to your friends and family and ask for them to help pay your bills because you had the unfortunate chance to get sick. That shouldn't be the way we run our country. That shouldn't be the way we pay our bills. The pharmaceutical industry, pharmaceutical and healthcare devices industry have been the largest, have made the largest donations. Their lobbying firms have made the largest donations over the past 8-10 years, and those numbers just keep going up. So in addition to giving us the ability to negotiate with them, we need to look at getting that money flowing, that dark money that's flowing into Congress and into all levels of government. We need to address that, and we need to put a stop to it. Because when our representatives are bought and paid for, they're not working for us anymore. They're working for those corporations that are writing those checks. So that's a big part of addressing this and a lot of other problems as well.
Thank you, Beth. Good, thorough answers by all of the candidates there, using up the full 3 minutes. I have a feeling this next question will also tax you on those 3 minutes. And it starts with Sarah. What is your opinion regarding our current education system, and what changes would you make to improve it?
Shall we wait for the train?
Yeah. And it does not go against your time.
reasons I wanted to move back home to Rockford after my mother passed was because I wanted my kids to go to the same public schools that I went to, and they do. I'm a product of public school. My children are products of public school. And we know that public school works, but it doesn't work for everyone, especially when it's underfunded and we favor private schools instead of public. Now, we see this on the federal level, but we saw it most recently here in Illinois on the state level with setting up a private scholarship fund for private schools so then wealthy people can take a tax credit if they contribute to a scholarship fund that would go to a private school. Now, the governor of Illinois says, well, that's not taking any public money away from public schools. Of course it is. A tax credit is as good as money. It's money that is not going to go into the general fund, which we use to pay for things like public schools. This is the key difference between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans don't believe that government has a role to play in making sure that no matter where in this country you live, everyone's going to have access to the same quality education. Because they don't believe that's the government's role, and that the government is something up here, other. As Democrats, we know we are the government. We govern ourselves, and we absolutely have a role to play in helping to improve everyone's lives a little bit, making sure that every resident of this country has the opportunity to succeed. That starts with public school. The other issue with private schools is they are not required to be ADA compliant, right? Like public schools are. And they're not required to provide transportation for students like public schools are. So every time we favor private schools, we are limiting education to the majority of kids in this country, and that's unacceptable. We have to do better, and that's why we need to elect Democrats, because we understand that we need and should be investing in people.
Thank you, Sarah. Neil, what changes would you make to improve, if any, our current education system?
I'll just start by saying my campaign office in DeKalb is 1 block from the railroad tracks in town, so I'm in my element. I'm not going to slow down if the train comes back. I'm a product of public schools in DeKalb. I attended public universities for college, NIU and U of I. Earned my PhD at a public university. I taught at a public university, the University of Michigan. So this is a topic that's near and dear to me. The problem with our education system, insofar as I can tell, both at the higher education level and locally, is the people who try to make it worse. We all share, I'd like to think, a goal of educating our kids and making sure our kids have an honest shot at a better life. And that's where a lot of attempts to change our system of education have come from. That's where the effort to change our schools came from, the charter school movement. Here's what we know about school reform. I'm going to do you a favor. It's going to sum 20 years of research in about 10 seconds. The best charter schools work about as well as the same neighborhood school would work with the same parents and the same students and the same families. That's it. The problem isn't our schools. The problem isn't our teachers' unions, despite the fact that teachers somewhere along the way started to get vilified. And I say that having been a member of the American Federation of Teachers for 7 years, and I know that personally. The problem with educational achievement in our country is not about the teachers or the schools, it's about poverty. The single biggest determinant in terms of educational outcomes, how you do at school, how our kids do at school, is how wealthy your parents are, where you live, what's your home life like, are you getting enough to eat, is there violence in the home, things that have nothing to do with classroom instruction. So the best thing we can do for our kids is simply put to make their lives better. We should have a universal breakfast and lunch program in every public school. That would work wonders. That would do more to improve childhood educational outcomes than any number of standardized tests or other reforms. And we do need to hold charter schools and private schools accountable. We know they don't work any better than the equivalent public school would. They have been an excuse, the points you heard a second ago, to channel public money into private hands, and they need to be held accountable. But we have to realize that first and foremost, when we talk about the educational problem, the educational crisis in this country, we're talking about a poverty crisis.
Thank you, Neil. Beth, your turn to talk education.
I was a special education teacher, and when I was doing that, along with teaching every day, I started an after-school program. And I had the privilege to work with an administrator and a team of people who were committed to making that school a community center. And we took a school that was in a challenging neighborhood with gang issues and some racial tensions. And we brought in a team of experts. And my after-school program was part of it. And we had counselors, and we had a variety of different organizations from the community represented there. And every week we would sit down and we would have our case management meeting, and we would talk about these kids. And I still remember these kids to this day. If I could have taken David and his little brother Mike home with me, I would have. But that's not the solution. Teachers can't do it all. We need to support teachers. We need to stop telling them, and by extension their students, that they are no more than data points on a spreadsheet. We need to give them the opportunity, we need to empower them to serve students. We need to give students wraparound services. We need to make sure that they have access to not only math and science and reading, but art and literature and vocational education, and school counselors who are going to make that school an intentional community and help us prevent not only the failure of education, but the failure of safety that has been an unfortunate byproduct of children being disconnected from their schools and their communities. So, all of the above. We need to keep money away from charter schools that aren't performing and are only for profit. Let me just not even start on Betsy DeVos. Our Secretary of Education should not be profiting from the system that's destroying our public education. But we need to commit to our students and our teachers in meaningful ways that let them really achieve what they can do. Because they're the ones out there every day, and they don't need guns. They need pens, they need paper, they need counselors, and they need our support.
Thank you, Beth. Marie, it's your turn to talk about changes, if any, to education.
Thanks. So one of the big problems we have with education is there is no standard of education from state to state, county to county. We have differences within our own district as to they meet the criteria. They have to meet a certain requirement in order to graduate, but the things that can be taught or the emphasis that those schools put on those categories is dependent on the local townships, counties, states. Federally, I think that we should have a standardized, accessible level where everyone has to be, but that includes funding our schools, which we're not doing. We're not funding our schools the way they need to be funded. Privatization is one of the worst things that has happened to our country. We privatize our schools, and what happens is we destroy our schools. We all go to different churches, we work in different places, we are very spread out. It's not the way it used to be in smaller communities. Growing up in Ottawa, there was a small town next door, Marseilles, and they had a high school and they were struggling to keep it open, struggling for the funding, and they had to close the high school and the kids merged and moved into Ottawa. Well, what that taught me, that was my senior year there, and that taught me that the community started to die when the school left, especially in rural areas. When there's not a concert hall to go to see a entertainer or a sporting event, you go, whether you have children at the school or not, to the school for concerts, for games. That's a social meeting place. That is where you have your epicenter of the community, and it bonds it together. By allowing information, by allowing charter schools and voucher programs to get funded, you're destroying those communities. We absolutely need to eliminate the voucher system. We need to put money into the public education system. I went to public ed school, my kids go to public school, my husband went to Jefferson and in Rockford. So we need to make sure that we do that. We need to expand before and after school care. We need to expand a breakfast program. We also need to make sure we are expanding extracurriculars and our vocational systems. Those are the ways that we can make our country better, because if children have the security and the understanding that there's a community behind them, they will be far more likely to be successful. Every study shows it. The need for a social safety net goes down when our schools are strong.
Thank you. I'm going to use this time to do a follow-up question, because I didn't think I heard. It's concerning more higher education. Northern Illinois University, of course, in the 16th district. You see tuition rise, it seems like every year. Bernie Sanders had a proposal for free tuition for colleges, or at least drastically reduced tuition. Would you be in favor of something like that? And if so, how would you pay for it? We'll start with Sarah.
My student loans are going to be paid off when my 13-year-old is a sophomore in college. At the rate we're going, her student loans will be paid off when her granddaughter is a sophomore in college. It's unacceptable. Students who want to go on to college should be able to go on to college and be able to graduate, get a job, pay off reasonable student debt, and still be able to buy a house within 5 years of graduating from college. That's not the system we have now. Now, not everybody wants to go to college, and that's fine. We should make sure that they have opportunities to learn skilled trades. I went to the Northern Illinois Building Trades Expo last week, and I learned how to lay brick, and I learned that's a real skilled trade. Most Americans don't understand that unions are professional jobs. And so we need to make sure that kids that don't want to go on to college and become lawyers eventually have that opportunity as well. There have been various taxes suggested to pay for college for all, and I think they're good ideas. There's the financial transaction tax, which would apply to all of these people making millions of dollars on their financial trades, not the middle class, not your average investor, the big ones on Wall Street. With that simple tax, that could go a long way to making college affordable for every American student who wants to go.
Thank you, Sarah and Neil. I just want to make sure I clarify public universities, obviously, that we're talking about here.
Having taught at a public university, I know all too well the difficult position that we're in. And unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle. As states like Illinois get into financial distress, and we all know there's dozens, hundreds, thousands of reasons why that's the case, they pull back their investment in public universities. And when they do that, public universities are basically faced with two options. One, pass those costs directly onto the students, or two, change their mission and change the makeup of their student body. The University of Illinois, just like Michigan, where I used to teach, now tries to poach out-of-state students because they pay full freight and in-state students aren't. Then people in Springfield say, well, we're not educating enough in-state students, so we're going to pull back more money. And around and around and around and around we go. So that's where we are today. I do support Senator Sanders' proposal for tuition-free college. And the reason why is that we have to get out that treadmill. We can't be on the merry-go-round of taking opportunities away, then not being able to pay for opportunities, then taking more opportunities away. I said at the outset, I think we have a moral vision in our party. The decisions we make politically say a lot about our values and what we think is important. The cost for Senator Sanders' proposal for tuition-free college, at least in the first couple of years, it came out to, I believe, about $60 or $65 billion, which is a lot until you realize that in the last budget process federally, they threw in another $70 billion for the Pentagon that wasn't even asked for. And Democrats and Republicans alike voted for that rider and voted those extra dollars in. So I think our choice is simple. We can pay for whatever we want to pay for. It's just a question of what we think is worth the investment. And I do think that a tuition-free education for every American child is a good investment.
Thank you, Neil. Beth?
I'm a graduate of Northern Illinois University, and when I went, I was a special education major, and I had the great good fortune of earning a scholarship that paid for, let's say it was half my tuition, and the trade-off was, it wasn't just a gift, the trade-off was I had to commit to teach for 5 years in Illinois. And that was a pretty good deal. Now, at the time, way back in the day, you could also go to college and put yourself through mostly by working part-time jobs and working hard in the summer, and a few loans here and there, but that scholarship helped a lot. So I think that, again, I too would support massive reforms to our college tuition program, especially at the junior college level. But we need to also look at tying those to how does that benefit the rest of us? In order to sell that, as it were, in order to make that popular throughout, because there is an appalling amount of anti-intellectualism in the country today. And I'm afraid that if we come in and we say free college tuition, that, again, while I think it's a great idea, I'm not sure it's something we can get done right away. So, finding a first step where we tie tuition forgiveness or loan repayment rates to benefiting communities that need those graduates and helping to grow that infrastructure. And once we get that door open, once we demonstrate that this is for the good of all, and that we're not trying to indoctrinate our children, or we're not trying to make it a one-size-fits-all, then we can move towards that final solution.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Murray, the final 2 minutes belong to you on this.
Thanks. Absolutely, we need to make tuition more affordable. There's a couple of things I'd like to see. One, Beth mentioned the program that she went to school on, and that was Teach for America, right, Beth? Was that program?
Before that.
Oh, okay. So what it was is it's a program that allows you to work for areas that are in severe demand, for professions that are in high need in urban and rural areas, mostly focused in urban, but I'd like to expand that to rural. So a few years ago we had a nurse shortage, right? Couldn't get nurses to save our lives. Everybody started going into nursing. We should be able to reimburse those people who choose careers that are in high demand for their tuition for working in those fields, in those areas that we need them. We should also strongly consider nationally doing community college free. But one thing I'd like to also consider is partnering with organizations. The IBEW has a partnership with all of the local community colleges. When you enter their apprenticeship, you have to go through certain training that requires an associate's degree. So the apprenticeship pays for you to get your associate's degree so that you can continue working and learning on the job. Those are programs that could be really beneficial to many people, many kids. Not only do they get the education, but they get the life experience, the work experience that ties with it. So those are 3 ideas that I have to moving us toward a tuition-free system.
Thank you very much. We will now move to a new question, a 3-minute question, a primary question. Do you feel changes need to be made to our current justice system? And if so, what changes would you make? We're talking justice system now, and Neil, you're first.
I do, and along a number of different dimensions. First would be the war on drugs. We know the war on drugs targets people of color disproportionately. We know it's failed. It hasn't made any difference at all, other than to incarcerate people, other than to throw good money after bad. Our war on drugs also has one other implication, which isn't discussed nearly enough, which is the effect our war on drugs has abroad with our neighboring countries. The United States regularly shovels money, shovels arms, shovels weapons and military advisors into places like Honduras and Belize, places in Central America, places in the Middle East, thinking that we can stamp out the supply of drugs militarily. And once that's done, in practice, is turn these countries, frankly, into failed states. And so we do this in Central America, and then we wonder why we have so many people trying to seek asylum and immigrate to this country. Those things are pretty directly related. So we do need to end the war on drugs. We do need to end that pipeline. And finally, we need to rein in a number of government agencies that have been led to run wild during the Trump administration. And first and foremost among that list of agencies is ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. ICE started issuing administrative warrants seemingly without being directed to days after President Trump was elected. They continue to do so to this day. We're actually now finding that at least one ICE director in Seattle was or has been accused, and it seems like a pretty open and shut case, of stealing undocumented immigrants' identities and selling those in the black market. It's been reported there are scams going on right now where people are phishing, telephoning, scamming undocumented immigrants using very specific personal information that can only have been gathered from ICE. So we have informants in ICE who are passing that information along for the purpose of taking advantage of people. We don't just have a justice system problem in this country. We have a problem with obeying and respecting the rule of law. Of course, that starts at the top, and we're not in a great spot with that right now, considering the occupant of the White House. But as soon as we change the occupant of the White House, restoring the rule of law and making sure that we have one standard of behavior, one judicial system, one system of laws for every American, regardless of who you are, has to be at the top of our list.
Thank you, Neil. I know it's a broad topic, but we have 3 minutes on. Beth, your thoughts on the current justice system?
One of my greatest concerns with the current justice system is our school-to-prison pipeline. And that relates, as Neil said, to the war on drugs. It relates to criminalizing behavior because we don't know how else to deal with it, because we are not making students safe, we are not making students feel valued, and we are not meeting their needs. So when we, as the adults who are responsible for them, the teachers and the parents and the community, because we all need to be responsible for one another, when we don't do those things, then young men, and it's mostly young men of color, are treated as criminals in their very own schools. And it is definitely related to race. It is definitely related to poverty. When students who are white and middle class commit an offense, whether that be a drug offense or get in a fight, we hear boys will be boys. Or when sexual assaults are committed, and he's a good kid, we don't want to ruin his future. But when students of color do similar things, it's straight into the system. And that's starting at younger and younger ages. So in addition to all of the ways that we need to make justice the fact, not, as Sarah said earlier, justice and the law are not always the same thing. But we need to make sure that we are protecting our kids, all of our kids, and educating them and not criminalizing them.
Thank you, Beth. Murray, your turn to talk justice system.
It's a very broad topic,
Yes.
so I'd like to focus in on one issue in particular, and that issue is the legalization of marijuana. If we think about it, I believe it's 70% of all incarcerated inmates are there because of drug offenses. So it's kind of a vicious circle. I get arrested for having a certain amount of marijuana on me. That amount is more than a misdemeanor, it's a felony. So I go into the system. I can't afford to get out of the system, so the system has to pay for me to stay there, which is far more expensive than it would be to have rehab or some sort of treatment facility if I needed it. By legalizing marijuana, we get several benefits. We get the benefit of increased revenue. It can be taxed and monitored. We also get the ability to free our jails, because what we would do is we would not only legalize marijuana, we would also immediately release anyone convicted of non-violent marijuana offenses. And then we also have to expunge the records of those that have had non-violent marijuana offenses. Because if I'm declared a felon, how am I going to get a job? If I can't get a job, how am I going to feel my own self-worth? If I can't feel my own self-worth, then I'm going to go back to doing marijuana. I'm going to go back to smoking marijuana or other substances that could lead to more issues. So we end up paying, as a government, far more than we need to. The other thing that I'd like to consider right away is eliminating the 3 strikes policy. I think that's prejudicial. I don't think it benefits anyone. And those are the 2 primary areas of criminal justice that I'd like to see reformed.
Thank you, Murray. Sarah?
Our federal courts are Article 3 courts, right? Article 3 of the Constitution. I think a lot of times our current president forgets that there are 3 branches of government that are co-equal to work as checks and balances on each other. Maybe we as Americans forget that as well. One of the results of forgetting about that, the Republicans have had, is this unwavering commitment to mandatory minimum sentences. In recent years, there's been bipartisan support for getting rid of mandatory minimum sentences to give back federal trial judges their discretion and their independence in hearing the evidence presented and deciding what is a just sentence for that defendant. It is really critical to our democracy that we have independent courts. Mandatory minimums take that away. Those are Article 3 courts. We also need to fund, from the federal level, specialty courts. Those don't exist everywhere. Specialty courts like the one here in the 17th Judicial Circuit, Mental Health Court. Many people end up committing criminal acts because they actually need access to mental health treatment. These courts have the resources to walk people through access to the care that they need instead of convicting them and sending them to jail and then letting them out of jail and the cycle continues. Other specialty courts are juvenile courts. Not every state has a juvenile court system. And juvenile court systems are either viewed as punitive, we're going to punish kids who do bad things, or rehabilitative. We recognize these are kids and they just need to be put on a better path. Those courts need to be supported. After what happened in Parkland, that child had so many interactions with law enforcement. A juvenile court would have been in the perfect place to intercede and intervene. And that's what we need. Lastly, Neil brought up ICE. Immigration courts are not Article 3 courts. They're administrative law courts that sit under the Department of Justice. There's a right for an immigrant to have a lawyer, but not a free one. There are no public defenders. The attorney who was just convicted of stealing immigrants' identities was the Department of Homeland Security attorney who brought immigration charges against immigrants in immigration court. But you know what? our justice system worked the way that it was supposed to. He was investigated, he was arrested, he was prosecuted, he was convicted, and now he is going to serve his sentence. And that is the type of justice system we should be proud of, we should support, and we should apply to everyone.
Thank you. We have time for a 2-minute follow-up before closing statements, but I'm going to use that because we have so many more questions to have just a 2-minute question here. That's a new topic. You have 2 minutes to answer this one, and we're going to start with Beth. What makes the 16th district unique, and what would you fight for in Congress that would be a direct benefit to residents of the 16th district? So this will be a 2-minute answer.
The 16th district is an amazing place. We reach from the Wisconsin border, where we almost are now, down and around through some of the best farmland in the nation, all the way to the Indiana border. What makes us unique, what makes us strong is our diversity. We have urban, we have rural, we have universities, we have small towns. That's what we will bring to Washington. The people in this district have not had a voice in Washington in the past 8 years. And it's time for us to bring someone to Washington who is going to listen to all of those districts, to connect with all of those voters, and bring that voice and those needs and those solutions. Because we are more than just needs, we are resources. And we will bring that to the U.S. Congress.
Thank you, and I admire your concentration there, talking over the horns. You might have that same challenge here, Murray, but you're up.
Could you give
Sure.
the second part of that question?
The whole question is, what makes the 16th district unique, and what would you fight for in Congress that would be a direct benefit to the 16th district?
Great, thanks.
Sure.
What makes the 16th district unique? You do. I do. We do. We're a diverse district, an amazing district. Growing up in Ottawa, the emphasis on community and depending on each other is something that shaped me and made me who I am today. So the diversity and the connection to each other is what makes us unique. What would we do that would benefit, what would I do that would benefit the district most? Would be a start right away on a real infrastructure plan. A plan that has an open and transparent bidding process. A plan that utilizes union skilled labor and that helps us. Beth mentioned the flooding. Growing up in Ottawa, we used to have days where we couldn't even go to school at the high school because it was flooded. We lost an entire elementary school because it flooded. Our rivers need to be dredged. The beds have settled over countless years and made them too shallow. In the summer, you can't get barges through. And in the winter, in the spring, it's flooded. We need an infrastructure program. That will not only give us good jobs that can't be outsourced, it will also make sure that we attract those companies who can provide more employment. So the first thing that every part of this district needs, no matter how different we are, is we need an infrastructure program that works.
Thank you, Murray. Sarah, again, the question, what makes the 16th district unique, and what would we fight for, or you fight for in Congress, that would be a direct benefit for the 16th?
This is our home. Everyone's home is unique. Everyone has a different home. This is where we live. This is where we want to be. This is where we want our children to return to and our grandchildren. And we want to make sure our kids and our grandkids have jobs and they can buy a house and that's a safe community. I know that's what I want. I want my kids to return to Rockford. I want all of your kids and grandkids to do that. We have a rich history here and it's our home. That's what makes us unique. What I want to bring to this district is something that we have lacked, and that is outstanding constituent service. We deserve to have a representative who has offices throughout the district that are open, who is available, staff that is professional, courteous, and effective. That is what representation means to me. And that is what I have practiced in over the last decade. My team knows when someone calls or walks into our office, they're walking in because they need help. There's a problem. They have a concern. And we take that seriously. And we deserve that kind of professionalism in this district. So what I will bring to the 16th is the best constituent service from a congressional rep's office in the state.
Thank you, Sarah. Neil, the final 2 minutes before closing statements is yours.
I think what makes us unique is the spirit that everyone in this room tonight brought with them, which was this understanding that we not only have to be engaged, we not only have to lead on these issues, but we're going to have to be able to do it ourselves. There's been great political activism all over this country. The Women's March in Chicago and other big cities, local marches, people joining groups, people following Indivisible. I think what sets us apart in the 16th is the understanding that we can't wait for a national group to do this for us. We can't wait for the Democratic Party to do this for us. If we want to see change in our communities, we have to all of us up here as first-time candidates, a lot of you in the audience as first-time activists, first-time members of the party, first-time precinct committee persons, that we have to stand up, we have to do this ourselves, we have to do it without an instruction manual, and the reason we have to do it is because the stakes are so high to stay home. And that is the attitude and the spirit and the political courage I have seen in every corner of this district. And that's what makes me so optimistic for the future. And if I can bring half of that political courage to DC, I think we'll be in good shape.
Thank you, Neil. And look at this. We worked it out so it's right alphabetical order here for the closing statements. How'd you do that, John? That's pretty impressive. So we each have 2 minutes for closing statements, and we'll go right down the aisle, and we'll start farthest from me. Murray, you have the closing statement first.
What's at stake for all of us at this point in history? That's what we need to ask ourselves when we go into that ballot box on March 20th. Freedom. Our voices are what's at stake. Those voices that are being marginalized, that are trying to come to a chorus that overwhelms deaf ears. We need representation of someone who is not thinking about insiders, not focusing on backroom deals, but actually listening to you. So I'm going to ask you something tonight. I'm going to ask you who will listen to you, who will understand you, who will fight for you in every way imaginable because they have been a fighter their whole life. Those are the questions we have to ask ourselves. Who will represent your voice, our voice, in Washington and do the best for you? The Chicago Tribune and the IVI-IPO, Independent Voters of Illinois, have both endorsed my candidacy because they understand that I have progressive pragmatism and that I would be the best to represent each and every one of you. And I ask you to consider that when you go into the ballot box on March 30th or 20th. Jeez, that'd be a little late. Again, my name is Amy Marie Briel, and you can reach out at any time. And if any of you would like my cell phone number, I will be more than happy to give it to you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you so much. Sarah, it's time now for your final statement.
My name is Sarah Gady, and I very much want to be your congresswoman here in the 16th. This is where I've chosen to live, moved back home to my hometown over 10 years ago. Every June, my firm marches in the Heritage Day Parade here in Belvedere. And we first started doing it because we felt that immigrant voices weren't being heard, and there were a lot of misconceptions out there about immigrants. So every year we march with our signs with great facts about the contributions immigrants make to our state and our country. The first year we marched, there were some boos. The second year, fewer. The third year, fewer. And now maybe one negative remark, the rest, it's clapping. And that's how we make change. My firm steps in to promote immigrant justice because it strengthens our community as a whole. It makes us better. What I will bring to this office is a dedication to the community, my home. Work that I've already been doing, and it's time to take it to the next level. We need a representative who's accessible, active, and accountable. Day after election, I'm still here, and I will continue to be here because that's the way you represent people, by knowing them and caring about them. Thank you.
And thank you, Sarah. Neil, time for your 2-minute closing statement.
I'd like to start by encouraging everyone to vote for Murray Breel on March 30th.
20th. Remember he said
Oldest trick in the book.
20th. Well done.
I decided to run for office. The reason I'm asking for your support for the nomination in the Democratic Party and to be Adam Kinzinger this fall is that I know how important these issues are because they've all been a part of my life. Immigration reform is not something that happens to other people. Immigration is a story of how I came to be here. It's a story of my family. Immigration is not a job, it's not paying my bills. It's part of who I am, it's part of the life I lead, and it's part of, quite frankly, my experience running in this race. And that's the reason I'm passionate about that issue. I'm passionate about healthcare because I know that if Bruce Rauner and Paul Ryan and Adam Kinzinger that had their way, my mom wouldn't have had health insurance when I was a kid. She would have died from her Crohn's and I wouldn't be here. I think where we fall short is not we can talk a lot about how it's important to send fewer billionaires to Washington and this, that, and the other. I think it's important to send people to Washington who have the courage and the capacity to act on these issues because they know how important these issues are, not because they're fads, not because they're topical, but because it's happened to them and that's why they know the stakes are so high. That's why I decided to run, that's why I'm still running, and that's why I'm really encouraged not on March 30th, but on March 20th, as well as in November. My name is Neil Mohammed. I'm from DeKalb, Illinois. Our website is neilforillinois.com. There are 2 L's in Neil. We have the other domain names too, so you should be able to find it even if you misspell my name. I'm asking for your support. I'm asking for your vote, and I'd much appreciate it on the 20th. Thanks.
Thank you, Neil. And Beth, the final 2 minutes are yours.
Thank you. As I said at the beginning of the evening, I'm running to unseat Adam Kinzinger. We've talked about how he's failed us all. We've talked about how the government isn't serving our community or many of the communities like ours. I'm running because government can and should do better for the people living in our district, in our state, and in our country. I've been a leader in my professional field. I have taught other people to farm. I have worked nationally and internationally to represent sustainable farming. I have taken a leadership role in my own community, running the community food basket, and it's time to take that compassion and that pragmatism to the national level. I will bring a problem-solving mindset. I will bring communication skills, and I will bring a dedication to serving my friends, neighbors, and constituents when I am the representative for the 16th District. BethVercolioOsmond.com. Stop by after the event. I'll be happy to give you a piece of literature that will help you with that spelling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and a thank you to all the candidates. This is a time we can applaud. I thought all 4 did an outstanding job. and you know we will be well represented no matter who comes out on top on March 20th. I learned a lot. I hope you learned a lot. I know since you are here on a Saturday night, you will probably be out to vote, but make sure you find some friends and get them to vote as well, because it's very important. We thank you for being here and spending our time, and a reminder that there will be a meet and greet afterwards. Refreshments, availability to the voters will follow this immediately. Thank you so much, and thank you, John, for having me.
Let's give one more round of applause to all the candidates one more time. And our special moderator, Mike, you're doing a great job. We're an honor to have him here tonight. Just a couple thank yous before we dismiss. I want to thank Officer King in the back from Belvedere being here with us tonight. I want to thank our timekeepers that kept everything right on track. We finished right at 8 o'clock. How great. That's Jennifer Lindeman and Patty Mezzi. And I also want to thank our caterers, Shar, Caitlin, and Kayla Paris in the back. Let's give them a round of applause. Our DJ, Reflex DJ service is Bob Fleshman. Let's give him a round of applause. He did a great job on the stage. And some of the candidates I didn't mention out there, we have Paul Stoddard, who's running for 70th state. There he is on back. There he is, state rep. Angelique Bodine, she's running for 69th state rep. Also state central committee woman. And who else? Oh, Sherry Bartell. She's running for Boone County District 3. And I hope I didn't miss anybody. I do want to recognize some of the elected officials that we had in the audience tonight. John Nelson, who is our state central committee person for the 16th Congressional District. Carl Wasco, who is a Rockford Township clerk, who is here tonight. And Paul is also a DeKalb board member. Once again, what a great honor it was to have everybody here tonight. Thank you so much for coming out on such a wet, miserable night. I hope you took the time and got some information tonight. Oh, I almost missed Paul Gorski one more time, but I saw him in the bright light. Paul Gorski, West Valley College trustee. Again, thank you so much for coming out tonight and taking this opportunity to get the information you need to make an informed decision. How lucky we are to have these kind of candidates, these caliber candidates. So one more round of applause to them. Hope you stick around, enjoy the coffee, cookies, water. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Oh, one more thing. We have Wendy LaFosse has a plea and some questions, or some instructions.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's been a joy to see so many people committed to getting information. I hope you enjoyed this evening, but the most important part is it was free. You got all this information, all this stuff from all these different candidates without it costing you a dime. That's not true for us. And we were happy to do it. We were happy to put this information out to you. If you would please be so kind, if you were moved by what you saw today and would like to help us out, there is a donation box out in front. Also, if you did the survey, please return our pencils. Again, I would like to thank you for coming out, and we also have a small gift, a kind of a token of appreciation for Mike coming out on this Saturday night. We appreciate, we know that you'd like to be with your family tonight, but you were here with us. Thank you so much. Enjoy the cookies and coffee, everybody. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, one more person I forgot to mention tonight. Our only Democrat on the Boone County Board, Jessica Mueller, is District 3. Let's give her a round of applause for being here as well. Thank you.